You are 12 years old, standing in a frost-bitten chapel while men older than your grandfather decide who will own you. The stone floor bites through your slippers, your breath clouds in the cold air. Candles gutter in their sconces, their wax bleeding down like tears. You repeat the Latin words you've been taught, your voice trembling, though you don't yet know they are vows that will chain your life to a man you've never met. This is not a wedding. It is a transaction. Before we begin, take a moment to breathe in this scene of another century. Across time and oceans, you're here with her, the child bride who would one day birth a dynasty. If stories like this move you, lend your voice to ours. Like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. London, Lahore, Manila, Sao Paulo, because history lives in all of us, and her story belongs to the world. Margaret Beaufort was born in 1443, an heiress before she was a child. Her father, John Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, had returned from war disgraced and broken, his campaign in France a failure. Within a year of her birth, he was dead. Suicide, whispered some, though no one dared write the word. His death left her the sole heir to a vast fortune and a cursed legacy. The blood of kings flowed through her veins, and with it came danger. The winter of her 12th year saw her bundled into a litter and carried south through the pale light of December. She was small for her age, slight, solemn, her dark eyes watchful beneath a veil. She understood enough to know she was valuable, though not why that value made her so powerless. Behind every polite smile at court, every bow, there were calculations. Who would marry her? Who would control her lands? Who would wield her inheritance like a sword? The answer, that winter, was Edmund Tudor, half-brother to King Henry VI, a man twice her age. The match was blessed by the king himself, cloaked in divine approval but reeking of opportunism. The chapel at Bletsoe was cold and still, its air thick with incense. Margaret's gloved hands trembled as the priest spoke. Edmund's voice was steady, practiced, a man used to obedience. When he placed the ring upon her finger, the metal burned with the chill. Somewhere beyond the chapel walls, snow fell over frozen fields, silent witnesses to the theft of her childhood. What did she think in that moment? Did she pray? Did she understand that she was being folded into a game older than herself, one where women's bodies were keys to power? After the ceremony, she was led to her new chambers. Heavy tapestries, a fire too small to fight the cold. The servants bowed and murmured, "My lady," but their pity lingered behind their eyes. In the corridor outside, Edmund spoke to his men in a low voice, about titles, estates, alliances. Her name was spoken like coin, to be spent, to be leveraged. At night, Margaret lay awake beneath the carved canopy of her bed, listening to the wind batter the shutters. The fire hissed low. She recited prayers to keep her mind still, but beneath the rhythm of Latin words, another thought took root. A small, sharp thought she could not yet name. That perhaps God did not choose her for peace but for endurance. England itself was unraveling. The wars between Lancaster and York had begun to stain the soil with noble blood. Armies marched beneath banners of red and white roses, and the weak king drifted between lucidity and madness. Amid this chaos, a girl's body was a fortress, occupied, defended, claimed. In the months that followed, Margaret was moved to Wales, to Pembroke Castle, under the shadow of her husband's authority. The air there was damp and salt-stung from the sea. Servants whispered that she looked like a ghost in her white wimple, too small to bear the mantle of wife. Edmund treated her with a stern courtesy that frightened her more than cruelty might have. His duty was clear, to secure an heir. And so, when spring came, and she found herself with child, the castle's women crossed themselves in silent disbelief. She was 13, her hips narrow as a boy's, her wrists fragile as bird bones. Yet within her, the future of a dynasty began to stir. Her letters from that time, brief, stiff, dictated, reveal a girl already learning silence. No outcry, no rebellion, only obedience recorded in ink. But those who later knew her spoke of something unyielding behind her composure, a gaze that did not waver even when men raised their voices. Some said she was born old, too solemn, too pious, too composed. They mistook survival for sanctity. The last night before Edmund departed for battle, he left her with a blessing, a command, and no comfort. "You are Beaufort," he told her. "Your blood is kingly. Bear it well." She curtsied. She said nothing. When the door closed, she exhaled as though she had been holding her breath for years. Winter returned. Snow fell again over Pembroke's gray towers. A child knelt before a crucifix, whispering prayers that sounded like bargains. Outside, waves crashed against the Welsh cliffs, their rhythm eternal, indifferent. Somewhere within her small frame, history turned. For what is destiny, if not the slow, cold forging of a will? And though no one saw it then, in that frost-lit chamber where a girl had been sold and sanctified, the seed of a dynasty was taking root, and the girl who was once property would one day command kings. The wind clawed at the towers of Pembroke Castle like a living thing, driving sheets of icy rain against the stone. Within, the corridors glowed with torchlight, the air thick with smoke and fear. Servants hurried past with bowls of hot water and torn linen, their faces pale. Behind a heavy oak door, a girl's screams tore through the storm, high, ragged, unrelenting. Margaret Beaufort was 13 years old. Her husband, Edmund Tudor, was dead, felled not by battle, but by plague, leaving his child bride widowed and pregnant in a kingdom at war with itself. Now, as snow gathered on the battlements, she labored alone, her body too young for the burden it carried. Outside her chamber the midwives whispered prayers to the Virgin. "Holy Mother, guard her womb, soften her bones, spare her life." Their hands shook as they crossed themselves. Few believed she would live through the night. The chamber was stifling, fire roaring in the hearth, the scent of blood and beeswax heavy in the air. The girl's hair clung to her temples, her eyes glazed with pain. Between contractions she murmured fragments of scripture. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." The priest standing at the foot of her bed thought she spoke deliriously, but she was bargaining, not with him, but with God. Margaret's body convulsed. The women pressed her down. "Push, my lady, for the love of Christ, push." "I cannot," she gasped. "I am breaking." "Then break," said the midwife, her voice raw with urgency. "Break and live." Hours dragged on. The storm outside rose to a howl, as if the heavens themselves echoed her agony. At last, just before dawn, a child's cry cut through the night, thin, defiant, alive. The women collapsed in tears of relief. But Margaret lay still. Her face had turned the color of parchment, lips bloodless, eyes half open. The priest began the prayers for the dying. Then, faintly, she stirred. "My son," she whispered. They placed the swaddled infant beside her, small, fragile, red-faced. "Henry," she breathed, barely audible. "His name is Henry." She would never bear another child. The birth had torn her body beyond repair, leaving scars that time could not heal. Yet, in that moment of ruin, she had done something no man of her bloodline had achieved. She had given England a future. For weeks, she hovered between life and death. The midwives nursed her with broth and prayers, while snow sealed the castle from the world. She did not speak of Edmund. Some said she did not mourn him. Perhaps grief had no place in a heart already consumed by survival. When spring thawed the Welsh hills, she rose at last, thin as a reed, wrapped in mourning black. She could barely walk, but her mind was sharper than ever. The child, her son, was taken from her care as law demanded. He would be raised under the guardianship of men who would shape his destiny for their own purposes. She watched in silence as they rode away with him, his cradle bundled in wool, the banners of Lancaster trailing behind. How does a mother endure that? To birth a kingdom and be denied the right to hold it? The answer, for Margaret, was faith. But faith sharpened into strategy. She clung to her piety like armor. Every prayer, every mass, every act of charity became part of something larger, a discipline of endurance. "God has marked me," she wrote later, "and through pain he instructs." Yet those who stood before her in years to come would learn that beneath her devotion lay an iron will. England bled as she recovered. The wars of the Roses raged, brother against brother, noble houses collapsing into ruin. The child she had borne, Henry Tudor, became both prize and threat, his claim to the throne a whisper carried in secret through halls of intrigue. The Yorkists hunted every Beaufort loyalist. The boy's name was a liability. Margaret moved through this chaos with the composure of one who has seen death and learned not to fear it. Her third marriage, arranged swiftly to secure protection, bound her to Sir Henry Stafford. He was kind, or kind enough, and gave her what she most needed: safety. Yet even then she never forgot the night her body was broken for politics, nor the infant she had birthed into a world of swords. Sometimes, at dusk, she would sit by the chapel window, the candlelight haloing her face. A nurse would bring word of her son's health from afar. "He grows strong, my lady. He rides well. He prays earnestly." She would nod, silent, her fingers tightening around her rosary. Did she ever resent God? Or did she see in her suffering the outline of purpose that she had been chosen to birth not a child, but a destiny? Years later she would be called "My Lady," the King's mother. But on that winter night in Pembroke she was only a child who survived her own death, and as the storm faded and dawn crept over the castle's stone walls, the midwife crossed herself and whispered, "The world has changed, though it knows it not." For within that newborn's cry, and the silence of the girl who birthed him, the future of England had begun to breathe. The candles in the chapel burned low, their smoke curling toward the vaulted ceiling like the ghosts of prayers. Outside, England was once again on the edge of ruin. It had been 15 years since the child mother of Pembroke nearly died bringing forth her son. 15 years of war, betrayal, and exile. The girl had been buried long ago. What rose in her place was something England had never seen before: a woman who learned to wield faith as a blade. Margaret Beaufort was 28, and every scar she carried had become a weapon. By now, she was thrice wed. Each union a calculation, not of affection, but survival. Her second husband, Henry Stafford, had died on the battlefield, another casualty in the chaos of Lancaster and York. Her third, Lord Thomas Stanley, was no knight of romance but a man of shifting loyalties, a survivor like herself. Together they played a dangerous game, outwardly obedient to King Richard III, secretly watching, waiting, listening. At the heart of her waiting was a single name: Henry. Her son, now grown, lived in exile across the Channel in Brittany. Every night she prayed for him, not as a mother prays for her child, but as a general prays for his heir. "God keep you," she would whisper, eyes fixed on the crucifix, "and when the hour is come, grant us victory." The wars of the Roses had devoured nearly every great house in England. The red rose and the white had both wilted, their petals drowned in blood. The people hungered for peace, for certainty, for a king who could end the madness. Margaret understood this before any man did. She saw the pattern, the exhaustion, the longing for order. And in that vacuum, she saw her opportunity. The chronicles tell of letters written in cipher, of couriers slipping through fog and moonlight, carrying messages sealed with her ring. She spoke with noblemen in secret, promising forgiveness under her son's reign. She knelt in church beside queens and traitors alike, her prayers concealing treasonous hopes. Even Richard, cunning as he was, underestimated her. To him she was a pious widow, forever at prayer. He did not see the web she was weaving around his throne. Her faith gave her cover, but also conviction. She believed, truly, that God had chosen Henry for this task, that all her suffering had been preparation for one divine purpose, to restore England through her bloodline. Her chaplain once wrote that she fasted like a nun and plotted like a prince. In the spring of 1483, Richard seized the crown. The princes in the Tower vanished soon after, and in that silence the realm began to turn against him. Margaret's hand moved swiftly. She forged an alliance with Elizabeth Woodville, the widowed queen of the dead King Edward IV. Two women, bound by loss and ambition, met in secret. The plan was audacious. Henry Tudor would return, marry Elizabeth's daughter, and unite Lancaster and York beneath a single crown. But months turned to years, and Henry's return seemed a distant dream. His ships were scattered by storms, his allies fell or fled. Still, she waited. Still, she believed. In the summer of 1485, word reached her. Henry had landed at Milford Haven. For a moment, the world seemed to still. Margaret rose from prayer, her face unreadable. "Then it begins," she said. The armies met at Bosworth Field. The morning air hung heavy with mist, the banners damp, the ground slick with dew. Margaret was not there, but every man who fought for Henry carried her faith like a shield. On the sidelines, her husband, Thomas Stanley, hesitated, torn between loyalty to the king he served and the woman he could never truly master. When the battle turned, it was his men who chose the future. Stanley's troops charged Richard's flank, cutting through the chaos. The last Plantagenet king was unhorsed, his crown torn from the mud. By sunset, it rested on Henry Tudor's brow. They said Stanley himself placed it there, proclaiming, "Behold, Henry, by the grace of God, King of England." But those who knew whispered another truth, that it was Margaret Beaufort, watching from afar, who had truly won that day. When news reached her, she did not weep or cry out. She went to her chapel, fell to her knees, and pressed her hands together until her knuckles whitened. "To Thee, O Lord," she murmured, "be all glory." Yet behind her prayer was something colder, the quiet satisfaction of a plan fulfilled. But victory has its ghosts. That night, as bells rang across England, she sat alone by candlelight. The flame flickered against her face, casting deep shadows. The years had carved her into marble, sharp, luminous, unyielding. Outside, the wind whispered across the fields, carrying with it the cries of the dead. Was this the peace she had prayed for? Or had she only exchanged one kind of suffering for another, traded innocence for empire, motherhood for monarchy? No answer came. Only the rustle of her robes as she rose, straightened her back, and whispered into the dark, "The boy is king, and I am his mother." It was not triumph she felt then, but inevitability, the cold weight of destiny settling upon her shoulders. And somewhere in the silence between prayer and dawn, Margaret Beaufort, the child bride, the broken mother, the architect of crowns, understood at last what power demanded. Not faith nor fortune, but the willingness to become both savior and sinner in the same breath.